we said to the initial team, this is going to be a 100-year business. And I mean, their eyes were like this, like 100 years? We haven't even done our first dollar of revenue yet. We actually developed a card, which very conveniently, I happen to have over my shoulder, the culture card. And this is maybe the most powerful thing in building this amazing company, Cresset, is the focus that we've had on culture and putting culture and people first.
So I read your book getting ready for this. And as I mentioned before we started recording, I started researching some other Centurion companies and stats around that. Pretty amazing when you look at Japan, and everything I found, it ranges from 33,000 to 52,000 companies that are 100 years old or older, and 3,500 companies in Japan over 200 years old, and 11 over 1,000 years. And then comparing that to the US, we have about 1,000 in the US that are 100 years old or older. And the oldest one I found was something called the Shirley Plantation. And it's still going today, started in 1613. It's farming and tourism. And then the average lifespan of a company is 12 to 15 years, which I think most of us in business understand that. That's incredible, those stats. Was that surprising to you when you started looking into it? And when did you even start looking into that?
First of all, again, it's great to be here, and it's such an interesting topic, and one that I think is a little bit counterintuitive because our society loves what's new and what's changing quickly and disruption and innovation. And it's fantastic. It's wonderful that our culture celebrates that. But we often miss what stands the test of time and endurance and the things that allow an organization, a family, or a company to last for 100 or hundreds of years. This showed up on my radar screen two ways. One was in my family business, which lasted for about 53 years. My father started a Christmas company while he was in college, hiring his fraternity brothers to dress up like Santa Claus, and he rented them to department stores like a Kelly Temporary Service Agency. And as only could happen in America, department stores became shopping centers, became malls, and my dad became the king of Christmas in Baltimore, which was an amazing and fun business to grow up in, thinking your dad was Santa Claus. And so that was one thing, watching my father struggle as kind of a first generation entrepreneur. He never went to business school. He never had a mentor. He didn't have any formal training in business. And he somehow struggled and managed to get this business to be the top of its industry, but it only lasted 53 years. And I just saw that challenge when my brother and I didn't go into our dad's business. The second was I was walking down the street one day in Baltimore where we lived, and I picked up a copy of the Baltimore Business Journal, and on the cover it said was the list of the oldest companies in the state of Maryland. And I looked at that list, and right at the top, and this has got to be close to 20 plus 30 years ago, it was Loan Brothers, and this was a company that made tents and party rentals, but they were 190 years old back then. So let's call it 30 years ago, they were 190 years old. And that company had started when Joseph Loan left England in 1815 and moved to Baltimore and started making sails for our Navy and for the clipper ships that were doing the trade between the U.S. and U.S. and England. And then he had to pivot before anyone knew the word pivot when steamships came in and disrupted the sailing clipper ships. And now suddenly no one needed sails at the same level. And he had 100 seamstresses that were sitting there with a declining business. He had to pivot into something else. And so he started making flags for all of our new states and cities and municipalities. And then he started making awnings. He had one of his kids had gone to Paris and saw the first awning in Paris and brought that back to Baltimore and ended up creating awnings for the retail trade and then for homes. And then eventually, by the time it got to the third generation, they pivoted again to making tents. But here I watched that company reading about it in the paper, and I was just like, how does a small family business in Baltimore last back then 190 years through war and famine and through, pandemics before the one that we know about and all the things that go along with those challenges. So between my family business and reading about that, I just started to wonder, what are the principles, practices, and values that stand the test of time and determine whether an organization, a family, or a company can be here 100 years from now? And that's how it all started.
Yeah, amazing. Most people, when they think about larger, long-lasting companies, and I guess some of these smaller ones too, they they think they're just kind of stuck in their ways and they found a particular niche, but that's not true at all. And going through your book, they pivot fast, they face reality, every day. Before we start getting into the characteristics of these companies and what it takes, because there's so many forces against them, in my view, how to overcome them. What led to starting Crescent and getting on this road?
Sure. So it's Cresset, so Cresset, Cresset, and the so Cresset came about. I'd had a wonderful career as an entrepreneur, going back to when I decided not to go into the family Christmas business and to launch a healthcare technology company when I was a student at University of Chicago, and my younger brother was a high school senior. And I dropped out one semester before graduation to launch what was called the Life Card, a optical memory card where you could store medical records and we could adjudicate healthcare claims digitally. And my brother deferred from Harvard and started this business with me. So I had this amazing career of starting and building companies, and then in private equity, as you mentioned, investing in companies and trying to help them grow and succeed. But then I had this tragedy happen in our family where my wife, Jill, and I had three beautiful kids, Greg and Jake, our boys, and we had a wonderful daughter, Kara, in the middle. And Kara developed leukemia, and sadly, 4 months later, passed away from complications of chemotherapy, really unexpectedly. So she passed away one night in her sleep, and it was just so shocking and terrible. And I just had to take pause and stock of our lives. I learned that 2 out of 3 couples that lose a child don't stay together. That was an overwhelming statistic. It just seemed like a very grim time. And so I thought, to protect my family, I'll retire from my business. I was 50 years old, had thought about retirement, but I did very quickly over 2 years, and decided to focus just on service to others, really think about what my mission is as an individual, as a human being, as a father and parent and member of the community. Um, and and so after I would say 2 or 3 years of working with Jill on just philanthropic initiatives around leukemia and lymphoma, around fostering entrepreneurship and mentoring entrepreneurs and helping at incubators, helping to actually start an incubator in Chapel Hill, where our boys went to school. And then something called Karma for Kara, where to this day we give grants of up to $1,000 to children in their communities who are doing service and developing a service ethic and service heart in their leadership. And so I was doing that. And after a few years of service, I really missed investing and I missed building things. So I got together with my dear friend, Avi Stein. He had had a life challenge. We had become friends, but I had learned that Avi had had stage 4 lymphoma, and had had a really tough life challenge and had been able to address that and overcome it. And so we were talking one day about our lives, and we decided, you know what, let's take our family offices and let's start investing together. So we started investing together, and then other families showed interest in what we were doing. So we started to then build a community of families. And then one day we were talking about our own experiences as clients of wealth management firms and what it was like having our own family offices. And we were really frustrated with the state of what was available, particularly to CEO founders. It just seemed that traditional wealth management, the wirehouses on Wall Street, weren't really engineering a solution that was focused on entrepreneurs and CEO founders. And then when we looked at the family office world, it didn't seem that the state of play in family office was where you had the sophistication that's required to support really a founder mentality and an entrepreneur. It just seemed that most family offices were more of administrators, just bookkeeping and maybe initiating some investments, but not necessarily supporting that CEO founder. So between the two, we decided, let's take a year and try and find something that we could be a client of. There must be a platform out there, a family office that has been designed and engineered from the ground up for founders. And we just spent a year looking for it and just didn't find it. So we decided one day that we would start Cresset, and we wrote a business plan. We then brought in an executive from the private banking industry, and then a group of 8 initial founding team members in Chicago. And we took that team and we spent 3 days off-site. Very easy to do an off-site when you don't have an office yet. By the way, that means every place is an off-site. But we were off-site for 3 days, and all we did was we said to the initial team, this is going to be a 100-year business. And I mean, their eyes were like this, like 100 years? We haven't even done our first dollar of revenue yet. We said, we're going to be a 100-year business. Number two, we're going to be an employee-owned company. Avi and I have had some success in life, and so we're going to participate and fund this, but we're all going to participate in it and be shareholders, and this will be an employee-owned and employee-controlled company. And number three, we're going to take the next 3 days and we're going to define our culture very specifically and intentionally, and we're going to write it down. And it was interesting. We went around the room and asked, has anybody else experienced that? Actually really writing down their culture and defining it that specifically, and no one had. So we spent 3 days doing it. We actually developed a card, which very conveniently, I happen to have over my shoulder, the culture card. And this is maybe the most powerful thing in building this amazing company, Cresset, is the focus that we've had on culture and putting culture and people first. So that's how Cresset came into being. And the way that I knew that we had something special is that we started talking about it only to people that we knew. And within about a year and a half, we had $3 billion of assets on the platform that we were managing for CEO founders and their families, or for families that had had a CEO founder and now maybe we're a generation away from it. And then it doubled to 6 billion. These are approximations, but it went from like 3 billion to 6 billion to 12 billion the next year to 23 billion when COVID hit, which was pretty amazing to grow like that. And fast forward to today, the different parts of our business, which we can talk about, we oversee either in terms of assets under management or assets under administration, about 240 billion today. That's in 8 years. And fast forwarding to today, we are living that culture that I showed you on the card. We are an employee-owned and employee-controlled company. We also have shareholders that are clients, and then we have a very small percentage of the company with a long-duration, long-term supportive investor. We're on our journey 8 years in to being a 100-year business. So really an exciting next chapter for Avi and me, two individuals that had really faced where life came to a stop and we had to really start again and reinvent ourselves and open a new chapter of life in a different way.
That has to be some kind of record to go to 240 billion under advisement management in 8 years flat.
I think it is. I think it is. But I think the 5-year CAGR is 50 to 60%, and it's really an incredible. But what I'm really most proud of is the amazing team that we have and the culture of the organization. It's a special place, and when we talk to clients and ask them, they always start with that they love the culture and love the people, and then they get into whatever else they care about after that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So there's a lot of characteristics of companies that stand the test of time for sure. And, one of them is succession planning. I was reading an announcement from your team that your current president, Susie Cranston, will be assuming the role of chief executive officer on April 15th of this year. So within 8 years, you're moving pretty quickly. And there's a lot of companies been around a long time, family businesses, where the matriarch or patriarch's there till well into their 80s. So let's talk about succession planning. When do you start thinking about it? How do you prepare for it? Because in so many ways, you can look at some of the biggest companies in the last 20, 30 years, like General Electric. I believe they got the succession process wrong, and you saw what happened, the value of it. And I don't know if you knew this, but Jack Welch was a partner with me in my consulting business, ETW, before he passed. So he and I became really good friends not long after he left GE and business partners. But it was just interesting reflecting on all of that. So what are your thoughts on succession planning, how to think about it, when to start? Just let's go a little bit there.
Sure. One comment on Jack Welch. I was in Chicago. He came in to give a talk, and I happened to be there as sort of the host, and I ended up driving him around and his wife for that day in Chicago. Had a wonderful time, really enjoyed spending time with him. And then a couple weeks later, a card comes in the mail addressed to me, and I opened it up, and it was a handwritten note. And I just thought that personal touch and the thoughts that he articulated of appreciation was just, he really distinguished himself in the way that he operated. So getting to succession. So you're right, we're 8 years old, and I think today is the day that we actually announced Susie will be CEO April 15th, and she's been with us for 2 years as president and chief operating officer. I've been thinking about this back from when we started the company. Avi and I knew that we had the vision for what we wanted, how we wanted to be served as clients. And that was our superhero strength, was understanding the client profile and what the needs were, how we wanted to be served for our families. But in terms of all the things of building a world-class investing platform, a world-class planning platform, a world-class family office services platform, all of the things that it takes to support a family, an entrepreneur, a CEO founder, to do all of that and to scale it beyond where we are today takes an amazing amount of sophistication, experience, and talent. And so getting that right, we were thinking about it from day one, even as a startup, as we move through the different phases that startups do, that scrappiness of and the creativity of creation, all the way to then kind of getting your sea legs, and then the scaling begins, overcoming adversity. I'm sure we'll talk about moments of truth and moments of trust, and then getting to where we are now as a very significant enterprise. And so you think about it, I think, all the time as a leader. And this idea that we talk about in the book of ethical succession and stewardship, it's so critical, because I think that many times our egos get in the way of finding the very best person. And I don't know all the psychology and the reasons for it, but when you look at succession failures, which you mentioned, there just has to be something in the psychology of it that ends up getting in the way. And but if you really tie into succession and then adding the word ethical to succession, and then you think about stewardship, that the organization is greater than any one individual, and that our highest purpose, so like if our highest purpose in a family or as a parent is to turn around and to be there for our kids so that they can hopefully thrive in a changing world. In organizational development, being in that world, our greatest mission would be to pass this organization forward to the future better than the way that we found it, and with a leadership structure that can stand the test of time and what future challenges will be. So I think of that, our greatest missions, our most important purposes as humans when it comes to being a parent. And then I think of that in organizational development as leaders, and there's some similarities there. So that's the most important thing. And then you have to go through the time that it takes and put the effort into figuring out who that person is, because there are so many places you can go wrong. You can put the ego aside and you can do all the right things and want the very best for the organization, but then inadvertently pick the wrong person, or they're not the person that you thought, because you haven't spent enough time really digging in and looking at all of their human characteristics, their strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect candidate. There's no perfect human being. We all have our challenges. And then just finding that they have ultimately what it takes, which for us, for Avi and for me, we were looking for someone that first and foremost had to have very high standards, had to be super high performing and very smart, knowing that they could actually deliver on what it takes to fulfill the responsibilities of CEO and to deliver results. But just as importantly, they had to be an awesome human and have all those wonderful human characteristics that we look for in leaders, of compassion and somebody that you want to follow into battle and to make it happen for them. The proverbial ask somebody, who's somebody you would run through walls for? And it's always those really great coaches, great CEOs that have those wonderful human attributes to match their talent, that we then want to perform for, and that's how organizations advance. And then they have to pay it forward and find the successors to take it beyond them.
Yeah. I find it's really hard to see how somebody's going to show up until they get in the seat. So when you're doing this selection process, so in listening to you and thinking about this, part of the process has to be if you make a mistake, you move fast to correct it afterwards. And at
Absolutely.
any point in time, I'm working with 20 to 30 CEOs, coaching in groups, individuals from startup to very large companies, and some are family businesses. And there's something I'm starting to call irrational entitlement. It doesn't have to be a family business; it can be any business. And these folks end up in positions of power, and it destroys the value that's being created.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? And how do you address that, or how have you addressed it? You have more experience than I have in terms of working with a number of companies.
Sure. It's so interesting because this does tie into psychology, and we can look at it through many different lenses. But ultimately, if we think about what powers our logic and being, it's our brain. Our brain is an organ. It's organic. It's not ChatGPT. It's not a computer. And so we have our strengths and weaknesses, and whether that is that we know that we should eat a certain way, and we know that we should exercise, and we know these things, and yet it can be a battle inside of us to turn around and to bring out our best and to maintain the discipline that is required and to push ourselves to do the things that must be done, and having a code around that we will not break, like always doing the right thing, but having a code by which you'll live by. And it's a constant challenge. And it's the same thing in organizations, that sometimes we end up being our own worst enemy, and whether it's our ego getting in the way, or some other element, that is what always seems to be the root cause of the phenomena that you described. So it's a constant battle. I'll give you an example. Avi Stein, my co-founder, Avi and I have a leadership dynamic that we call constructive tension. And we've worked really, really hard to come as closely as we can to perfecting it. And we've done our very best to teach it within the organization. And constructive tension means whether you're the board member of a company and you are there for a CEO, or whether you have a partnership like Avi and me, or you're a leader and this is to your direct reports. Constructive tension is how to be riding that fine line of being sufficiently challenging to have a highly functioning relationship and with really great outcomes, but also sufficiently supportive. And if we think of those two extremes, if we are overly challenging, we create an environment that's hard for people to perform long term. They feel constantly threatened and under attack because we're just challenging them all the time. Nothing is good enough. I remember early in my career, starting the life card that I mentioned earlier. I'm with my brother, Doug. He's 18 years old. He's a kid. And the head of technology at Blue Cross Blue Shield said, I need a business plan. Like, if we're going to advance this life card, I need a business plan. So my brother and I and two friends of ours, we spend like 3 days working 24 hours a day, and we write what we think is the best business plan of all time. We submit it in. It comes back in a matter of hours, and it's just crossed off. This is terrible, not good enough. Try again. So we rework it over the next 24 hours and deliver it again. And when we delivered it, the head of technology turned to us. He said, okay, I'm going to read it now. So literally, he took the first draft. You want to talk about overly challenging? And he just gave it back to us without even reading us and told it was just terrible. That's excessively challenging. And then, of course, we all know what being overly supportive is. We've seen that. And, that is, when you're in kindergarten and you get to take a nap every day in the afternoon, that would be maybe the extreme version of being extremely supportive. And so this constructive tension is getting the right balance. And Avi and I have that. So we challenge each other probably every day around decisioning. And we have something we call our decisioning engine in order to measure the quality of our decisions and hopefully keep getting better at it. So that's one way, that's one system you can use to try and enhance your performance and to kind of stay away from the dysfunction that you see. And you see dysfunction in families and family structures, and you see dysfunction in organizations and in company structures. And it's really, really frustrating and really disappointing that here we are in 2026, and with all of our technology and the access to wisdom and knowledge that we have, that we're still struggling with that is just really unbelievable.
Yeah, I think our listeners are going to love this concept of constructive tension because every culture is different. I can go in and probably a lot like you, my comfort for being uncomfortable is really high. And so I can go in and when I work with people that are going for it, and it's never anything personal. We're just, hey, we need this, and let's get everything organized. In some cultures, they run and it's amazing. In other cultures where the team members weren't held accountable, for years and years, they're being paid
Yes.
100% of what we agreed to pay them or the company agreed to pay them, but they're delivering 20% or 40% of what they agreed to. And it's unreasonable from their view that you're asking them to actually do what they agreed to do. And so it's like determining when you go into a business, where is that line where we can create this tension and then start productively moving forward from there, right? So you
100%.
have a few stories of where, wow, there wasn't much accountability and you had to back way off and successfully work through it. Sometimes that's really hard to even work through.
Sure, absolutely. One in the history of Cresset, there was an acquisition that we did early on. It was in 20, I mean, it was maybe in 2020, and they had a technology that they had been testing, a digital technology, and we're spending maybe $250,000 a year on that technology. And for whatever reason, I'm a curious person. So, Avi and I have our, we're not the same. So we have each of us different areas of strength and different weaknesses. And for whatever reason, this particular technology really intrigued me, piqued my curiosity. I spent a lot of time on it. And when we came to closing on this deal and coming together, I thought that this technology had a role to play and that there was something there that was much greater than what we were seeing. And I just remember there was a day where we gathered some of our senior leaders, including Abby and me, and we started talking about it. And literally, it was like people were falling by the wayside. At the beginning, I thought I had 3 or 4 advocates along with me. And by the time this conversation got to the end of an hour, I literally was by myself. And I'm a founder of the business. I can only imagine what this like if you're, in a different level in an organization. And I literally felt alone. And I remember I continued to advocate for my position, constructive tension, and do my best to be persuasive and fact based and unemotional. But I do remember going home and telling my lovely wife, Jill, this was really one of my hardest days in a decade where I felt all alone, like I was in the corner of the business with my back up against the wall, and it was just me. What was amazing in our culture is that I was able to turn that around and gather enough support that then we took it a few steps further, and it ended up turning out to be a wonderful technology that's still one of a very important one that we use today that's been very, very important. So that's an example. That's the one that comes to mind recently. But there are many, many examples that we've all had where you find that decisions are made, in a capricious way, without the right facts, without the right people in the room, without some sort of process around how we discuss things. There's a sense of entitlement. You talked about this, a moment ago, and that's terrible, whether it's in parenting and in the family structure, or whether it's in organizational life. Entitlement is just a terrible dysfunction. So we've all experienced it. And then, of course, there are case studies about this and the terrible tragedy of this space shuttle, the Challenger, and that the engineering failures there, and that they didn't have constructive tension amongst the engineering team, and so they were kind of too polite to each other and didn't confront their reality, and a terrible tragedy ensued. And there've been other examples, even cultural examples. There's one of of an Asian airline, and where the two pilots in their training, this kind of politeness is one of the cultural attributes, and they got into a bad situation, and the co-pilot did not sufficiently challenge the pilot, and sadly a tragedy ensued there too. So there are many, many examples. This, you don't have to look that far. Um, but we have a solution, and that is having this ethic of confronting our reality every day, and exercising our uncomfortable conversation muscle, but exercising it in a spirit of positivity, that we're looking to build something, we're looking to build people up. This isn't some sort of island game of the last person standing. It's the other way around. We want to grow the organization. We want to attract amazing people and grow. We're up to 660 employee owners now. So that means exercising exercising your uncomfortable conversation muscle, but doing it in a constructive and positive way.
Yeah, I'm always interested in better language to get people on that track and building their own momentum. Because I've heard you talk about, and you mentioned in the book, growing is really important. I think we're healthier and happier for sure when we're growing as an individual,
Yes.
mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of that. And some people seem like they just want to fight you to the end on it.
Yes.
And so what language have you figured out or approaches to get folks to see the real value in that? And those, by the way, because I'll be 65 this year. I've got a lot of friends that are well into their 80s, some in their 90s. And those that embrace growth, they generally are just happier. And those that don't, they become ornerier as they get
Yeah.
older. So what have
Yes.
you learned about helping people see the value in growing?
Sure. So I think it starts with, there were two books that I came across early in my career that, in my view, are treasures. The first one I read was Crucial Conversations, which was written all about the way in which we have a conversation. And that's what got me thinking about the mechanics of these conversations and how we actually have them. But then the book that really changed the game for me and how to manage this great challenge was called Fierce Conversations, and it was written by, I think, Susan Scott, and it really changed the game for me, because that's where this whole concept for me of constructive tension came from. That's where this idea of starting a conversation by letting the other person know that I am fully there in every way, shape, and form. This has my full attention. My mind is not elsewhere. This conversation that we're having, this is everything. And that I'm bringing this spirit of positivity to the conversation. I'm here with the idea that good things are going to come out of this conversation. But after that background, which sets the table, it's a very real conversation after that of confronting our reality, whatever that might be. And whether it's inherent of the challenge of the individual, where you were talking about some of their behavioral characteristics, or whether it's something else. Maybe it's a business model issue in our young company, and we have to confront that challenge and what we're going to do about it. But whatever the challenge is, it's bringing it out to the front. It's confronting it in a positive way, being very real about it. And then after that, talking about what we're going to do next. And if this is something where somebody has hit their limit and they're just not going to be able to grow beyond there, then ultimately the next phase after that is the reality that we're facing. The hard, cold reality is that we're not going to be able to continue on this journey together in this organization. And that's when you get into, counseling somebody out of the organization if they can't change. And it's hard to predict. I've had some cases where people were so, I thought it was so difficult, and yet they surprised me in a really positive way. And then I've had people that I thought, oh, this will be an easy change, and they just really struggled to make that change. So it's hard to predict. I'm sure there are some markers and things that we could identify that you'll find that would say that somebody can do it. But what I know for sure is, without this kind of fierce conversation, without exercising the uncomfortable conversation muscle, but doing it in a spirit of positivity, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of it, just getting folks to understand that fierce conversation muscle is valuable and think about what it would take to start it and then get them started that way. I've always thought the most caring thing we can do with team members that we're working with is to be super candid around where they stand regarding performance so they know 100% of the time over time. And so I sort of developed candid, always caring, and never tolerate unhealthy behavior or games. And that's served me really well. I've started 8 companies so far. One grew to over 500 team members before I sold it to Textron for 9 figures in 2016, and never had an employee lawsuit, never had an EOC claim that stuck. And everybody ran through walls. Everybody acted like the CEO of their own role, getting that right. It's easy to talk about all these great ways to run a business, make it enduring and all of it. And I always thought of my aerospace company the way you wrote your book. Everything I did was reinvesting in the foundation for responsible, continuous growth. But there's literally thousands of nuanced ways to handle conversations, when those forces against you come up as you go through it. So saying follow these 6 principles and you'll be amazing, it's not true, right? How do you advise about that?
I know it's so frustrating when, you go onto YouTube or wherever you go for entertainment and information, and people promise you that with these 3 things, this will happen, and that's just it's like us pulling out a toolbox. Like I pull out my toolbox, which I have in my garage with all my favorite tools, and you pull out your toolbox with all of your favorite tools, and we have a toolbox, each of us, but it likely has some things will be the same. We'll both have a hammer, but we won't have all the same tools. And I think it's just really important to get people thinking beyond that oversimplicity, and really thinking about culture. Because at the end of the day, I think one of the places that we fail is not thinking about culture as an operating system. I think a lot of people think of culture as behavioral characteristics, which is great, and that's a starting point. And certainly, our culture card has behaviors on it, of how we treat each other. But think of culture as an operating system and the way in which we treat each other, the way in which we make decisions when no one is watching, the way that we confront our reality, which we just spent some time talking about, but all of those things, and the way in which we do those difficult things, right? Because you can do a difficult thing in a truly negative way, and you can do a really difficult thing actually in a positive way. So culture is an operating system. We've all heard that statement that culture eats strategy for lunch, and I think that's true. And even beyond that, I think that culture's what allows strategy to happen. It's what allows strategy to be executed upon. And so that's how I go beyond the 3 things that might make a difference, or the 6, or even one idea like constructive tension and how important that is, or a fierce conversation. It goes beyond that. We have to think more holistically, and we have to really keep culture as that paramount operating system for the business. Which, listening to how you built your business, just what you just said, I can tell that was a really important pillar, was your culture.
I've always thought of the culture game as we want to connect culture to creating value. It's the environment from which we create value. It's all about productive engagement. It's the spiritual value creation piece for me is always how connected everyone is, because at its core, it's or foundation, it's about connectedness. And so 100% aligned with what you're saying. And even in the book, you talk about Cresset and how you came up with the name, like the meaning behind the name and everything that you went through with it. Like it's so ridiculously important. I want to get back to the family office and the services that you provide for a couple of minutes. The the average time to become a millionaire when you start with nothing is across all paths is about 32 years. Whether it's real estate, smart savings, starting a business and all of it. Um, I was kicked out of the house at the beginning of my senior year in high school. My parents racked up debt in my name that I ended up paying off so they wouldn't get in trouble for it. So I started kind of negative, and it was 18 years before I was worth $1 million. And then fast forward, I have 9-figure exits and just things are going great. I'm still running companies today. I love being on the front lines, creating value. I'm never going to get off. If I can do this to 120, I'm going to do it. but it takes time to get there. And the first event is, for a lot of folks, when they're making money for the first time, is selling their business. It's a big deal. I had to create my own office because I couldn't find what you were describing. And I've got an amazing team. There's a few full-time people, and it's really cool what's happening. Um, so talk about that. You've got the investment piece, you've got the saving time piece, and then I want to go from there to get your advice on how do folks without large amounts of material wealth, what should they be thinking about? So for your ultra high net worth folks that you work with, what's the real advantage with your brand and what Cresset offers?
Sure. The way that I think about it, and I'll get into the detail, is that when Cresset is at its best, our clients they get their time back to put that time where they wish. And that could be anything from I've built a business like you described, and I'm having an exit, and I took a lot of time away from family to do that. So my next thing is I want to use time and focus on family. Or they might be a serial entrepreneur and they want to start the next business because they're driven and have passion for that, or helping others like you are doing and I'm doing by writing a book and putting it out there. Whatever it might be that our clients want to do with their time, we give them that time. And then secondly, we give them the peace of mind to be able to do whatever that next thing is that's important to them, and to do it with peace of mind and without losing sleep, which so many of us do as we worry about financial things or our kids or other elements of it. So that's the big headline. How we actually do it is, you mentioned investments, and that's a piece, traditional wealth management and investments, and you have to be good at that. Both public and private assets are very important in that. Planning is incredibly important. Scale is important, because when you go to invest in a manager, if you're investing at scale, you can negotiate better terms. And when you've got different investors all investing in the same asset classes, if you're able to get a level of performance, but you're able to reduce fees and the friction and cost of fees by some amount by using your scale, that is, in essence, a guaranteed return, those savings. It's going to drop right to the bottom line for our clients. So that's the investment piece. The next piece of it is the family office services, and that is all the things it takes to help power somebody's life, especially the life of an entrepreneur or a CEO founder. So it's from the most basic things like bill paying and investment reporting of their overall balance sheet, to all of the family accounting and bookkeeping, all of the estate and tax planning, the actual taxes, even the preparation of taxes, all the way through to family governance and education, how to be a highly functioning family, how to talk to your kids about money, when to talk to them at different stages of life and maturity, but how to be a highly functioning family, and how to have that governance of the family office for future generations and design that in, all the way through to concierge services, which are all the things that you experience in a wonderful, going to a great, great resort, and you come across an amazing concierge that just sort of makes magical things happen, of whether it's dining or travel or planning a wedding or any of the amazing things can happen in life. So it is fully comprehensive around all the things that you would need to power your life. And then the last piece of Cresset is community, which you don't traditionally find in the family office world, and you don't traditionally find it in wealth management. Most wealth managers don't want their clients to necessarily know each other. Having not come from the industry, I don't exactly know why that is, but we changed that, and we've created an amazing community with a peer-to-peer learning network within our families, where they enjoy knowing each other, and they enjoy learning from each other and sharing ideas on philanthropy and service, or in investments, and just best ideas. And so that's been a powerful element of community, getting them together. And then within that community, we have a very special kind of sub-community called Cresset Catalyst, and that's for first-time founders, first-time CEOs, first-time GPs of funds, first-time members of C-suite. And that came about because when I was 28 years old, one of the great and most famous Wall Street firms turned me down for not meeting their minimum. I'd already exited 3 businesses. I was very illiquid, like many entrepreneurs are. And they just came down to Baltimore from Philadelphia, had lunch, asked me a lot about the business at the end, gave me a little pat on the head and said, when you get to, I don't remember what the number was, 10 million or something, then you can be our client. We look forward to helping you. So that was such a terrible experience. Like, oh, I need their help now. I can't wait for that. So we have Cresset Catalyst so that nobody has to ever feel that way again. And we take our most high potential, talented young people and set them up for success really early on. And what's amazing is in that first cohort of like 140 individuals have come into that program, there've already been 15 to 20 exits in like, I don't know, 28 or 30 months. And I think that I heard that we've identified what we believe is the first billion-dollar exit will be coming out of that 140-person cohort. So these are super high potential individuals that it's really been irresponsible of the financial services industry to ignore them and to tell them they don't meet their minimum. Someone should have stepped up to help them, and that's what we're doing. So that's all the things that are on the Cresset platform, and it's amazing. Now you said, well, what about for somebody who doesn't have those resources? I think of that under the idea of designing your own family office when you're not ready to build one, when you're not ready to use a firm like Cresset. And so you have to think about what are the elements, what are the things, what are the tasks and things that you need, but what you should not be doing. So if you're trying to build a business, if you're paying your own bills, probably not the best use of your time with all the things that you have to do. If you're building a business to do the comprehensive reporting of whatever all the things are that you have, maybe not the best use of your time. So I think along those lines that you can, in a virtual way, put these things together. Like one of the ideas in the book is that it's hard many times to find a mentor early in your career. But it's so much easier now because you can, in a worst case scenario, build a high performing advisory board using an LLM. And you can turn around and have literally anybody who's known and characteristics about them are known and put that into your imaginary or virtual LLM based advisory board. So you can do that for mentorship, and you can actually do a lot of the things and coaching that you'll need around these services. And how you can outsource some of them to an accounting firm. You can outsource some of them to a law firm. You can start off with a basic family office that's completely outsourced. And then as your needs grow, you can grow in the more sophisticated solutions from there.
Yeah, that's great. And in some additional context, I'm CEO of a company called Dinner Table Family, and it was end of May 24, completely reset a kids banking app business that failed. And we've got about 40,000 parents, 67 countries in our community. And we started out, hey, we want a community of families raising kids that will create value in the world. But it's really about families intentionally creating holistic value, material, emotional, and spiritual. I'm super interested in the low-income families, and one of their limiting beliefs is, well, I don't have money, so I'll never have it. Not true. And when I look at things that are going on, it's always decisions and behaviors that are causing them not to rise. And I relate well to them because I started from negative and was able to. It just took a long time. So what are your thoughts? If you could speak to, just imagine you got 1,000 low-income family parents in the audience. How should we think about starting and building generational wealth? Because if I did it, I really believe anybody could do it. They just need to get rid of the beliefs, and with the right mentorship and advice, they could probably go at least twice as fast as I did. What would you say to that group? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that, and I know that when life is tough, it's hard to hear this, but it is true that like anything is possible, and that so many people could be performing better and could be achieving more And you're absolutely right that there is self-limiting thinking many times from the environment that perhaps we didn't choose, but it was the environment that we were in that becomes a great challenge. In my family, my grandfather only went to the 8th grade, taught himself how to play the violin, ended up making a living working in an orchestra, eventually had his own orchestra, eventually had a restaurant, a club. And my dad was the first one in our family to go to college, which then opened his eyes to the potential and the possibilities. And then he started this wonderful Christmas business as an entrepreneur. But that business only went so far, as we talked about in terms of 100 years, and also in growth. It only went so far because he didn't have access to the knowledge, the experience, the mentorship, or it could have been a business school education. There are just so many places this can come from. Now we have these amazing LLMs. And so we truly have access to knowledge in a way that we've never had before, and ability to learn in our own way. I mean, you can literally take any knowledge that you need and turn it into a podcast, which is a great way of learning. So it's the best of times. That's the best news about your question. It's the best of times to overcome those limiting beliefs and the other constraints that one might think that they have. So that's the good news. But it does start with having more of a positive mindset, because I've just found in my own life, even experiencing a terrible tragedy of the loss of a child, every parent's worst nightmare, and just being crushed by this, that even in the worst, that there are ways of elevating your thinking and starting to think more positively and around possibilities. They're not guaranteed, but you start thinking about what's possible and expanding your horizons around what's possible. And that mindset allows the next good thing to happen, because it takes so much more, as we know. You talked about the 6 things. I talked about the 3 things. So there's all kinds of process and methodology and other things that come into play. But it starts with having a more positive outlook and thinking more in terms of possibilities. And with that, luck starts to come your way. When you combine that with hard work and putting the time in, luck starts to come your way. And it's an amazing thing how, 2 people who are completely the same in the exact same environment, in the exact same town, who live in the exact same house, but just next door to each other, those 2 people will have such different outcomes, and have a different kind of exposure to luck. It's sort of increasing the exposure area that we have to luck. If we have a giant parachute, we're going to catch a lot more luck than when we're going sideways and we're the narrowest that we can be, and we're really struggling with that positivity and that possibility thinking. And then something negative happens, and we're like, I'm unlucky. And bad things happen. They do, and it can be so random. But you want to increase the surface area of luck, and that does start with possibility thinking and being a little bit more positive, knowing it can happen.
Yeah, well, that's my biggest takeaway so far from there's so much here, but just possibility thinking. And we've all heard if you want a relationship to work, there should be a lot more positive interactions than negative or critical interactions. And I often wonder, and I think this is a bigger epidemic than I even realize, what's the internal talk like? And do you have more positive interactions, significantly more than negative? And then one of my recent guests on the podcast said, if anybody talked to one of my family members the way I talk to myself, I'd kick their ass. And I thought, okay, so
Yeah.
that's the test, right? To be
Yeah.
doing it.
It's genetic. It's wired into our DNA. It's that basically we're engineered for survival. And so if you're going to survive, you're always having to think about what might happen. And particularly you're thinking about the things that honestly could kill us, or, that affect survivability. And that's what makes it hard. That's why a lot of times we get into those cycles of thinking about the most negative things that can happen, because it's actually kind of in our biology. But we can overcome it. I tell myself that our organs in our body, our heart, our brain, they work for us. And we need to think of it that way rather than letting them drive our behavior.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I very intentionally am aware of all of that in terms of internal thinking, and it does become more positive and possibility thinking um, over time. A lot more in the
It's where it
community.
starts.
that I'm leading. So with the 40,000 parents, I've got 5 different communities that I personally lead, two virtually, 3 in person. The in-person communities are typically low-income families, up to 100 families in each group. And foundationally to everything we're doing, and you've talked about family meetings, we encourage them once a month without fail, get together, talk about and refine family goals, talk about everybody's job for the family, talk about what it means to be a leader in the family, and everybody can be. Let's move them in that direction. And let's look at last month's budget and how we did. And we make it a team sport where every family member, even 5, 6-year-olds, have a line item on the budget that they track. And it's pretty cool. And from there, within 12 months, to watch the differences and how they show up. And in particular, the leadership piece, I've interviewed a lot of wealthier families, and they talk about leadership around getting into the family business, but almost nobody has a list of what it means to be a leader in the family. What's your approach and advice for family meetings that they should be
Sure.
having?
Yep. So first of all, with young children, before kids go off to college or whatever they're leaving the nest, I actually really believe in weekly meetings, the frequency weekly. And if you think about our traditions and whether the tradition was the Sabbath or whether it was Sunday church, there even in an entrepreneurial busy life, there can be time for this on a weekly basis. I think it's so important because the great irony of parenting is that the better parent that you are or you were, the more independent your child is. But that's so ironic because the more we love them, the more we want to hold them so close, protect them from every bump, fall, or bruise, and make life easier for them. So that's why I think weekly family meetings and having a platform where we talk about our successes of the week and our challenges of the week. What was the hardest thing that happened? What was the best thing that happened? And talking about those things openly is so important. And then having an agenda, as you mentioned, but also having a list of topics. So I found that there were topics that the kids loved. Like one of the topics is where our family came from. So going through family history as far back as you can go. Where did the family, were you an immigrant? If so, what generation? Where did you come from? What do we know about our ancestors, and what they did, for a living? And so that was a favorite of the kids. What was I like as a baby was something that the kids always liked. I ran an annual fire drill. Our kids told us that one of their favorite family meetings of the year was the fire drill, when I turned around and I literally set everything up in the house, and then I would create an alarm and the kids had to run through a fire drill. So there's so many things you can do to make it productive and interesting and empowering and educational and fun for the kids. But I like that frequency of as close as you can to a weekly meeting. And ultimately for the families that, and I love this idea that you're describing of families that are aspiring to do better and to be entrepreneurial and to raise capable and entrepreneurial kids. I think that sounds fantastic. I think the other thing that I would add to that conversation for parents is to look at your life and your family life and to ask yourself every day, what am I tolerating but shouldn't be? And that could be, that your child's in the wrong school, they're in the wrong place or with the wrong teacher, whatever it might be that is a constraint, but something that you could take some steps to doing something about. And in our own lives, I find that question to be incredibly empowering and important, whether it's in relationships, someone that's taking advantage and not being a good friend or a good partner or a good whatever it might be in life, and how to confront those things and do the right thing, whatever that means. But asking ourselves every day, what am I tolerating but shouldn't be? And looking at that within our family life. It could be, so many times parents, they treat their children like a friend. They give them things too easily. I have a dear friend who had a rule in the house: when a child asked for something, "Daddy, will you buy me this?" He'd say something along the lines of, "We're going to talk about this in a month. And if a month from now you still want that, then we'll have a conversation about it." And 90% of the time, that thing that was that power of the moment, I have to have whatever, it just sort of dissipated and went away. and made those conversations so much easier. So whatever it is, we have to teach our kids to be resilient. We have to teach them to be resourceful. We have to teach them to be respectful, because the consequences of that can be severe. You talked about in organizational structures, what happens when sometimes somebody's not able to adapt, they're not operating properly in that, and that can really have a negative impact on them. So these are things that we have to, agility. We're in such a rapidly changing world. We have to teach our kids how to be agile and the ability to move as the economy changes. The jobs that we have are changing into other kinds of jobs. Entrepreneurship, the businesses that we can build are shifting into other kinds of businesses we can build. Making good decisions. You exited your businesses, as you talked about in your life. Well, when's the right time to do that? And knowing how to make those decisions. So those would be some of the things I would think about for the families that you're describing.
Yeah, so much wisdom, great advice. Thank you. And I did write down, what am I tolerating but shouldn't be, from reading your book. And that's a great question for CEOs. The challenge for a lot of them is actually doing something about it, having the,
It is. It
the
is.
force.
And in our lives, I mean, in terms of like the organization that you were describing that you're a part of, what are the things that are holding us back? And whether it's even generationally that we were in some way stuck in something, circumstances, again, not necessarily of our own creation, that just happened by happenstance. How do we turn around and change the direction of our lives and the possibilities, and increasing the numbers of possibilities of good things that could happen? And then, of course, most importantly, how do we pass this forward to our kids so that they have a chance at success? And what to do, by the way, where, sometimes there are amazing stories of parents that made incredible sacrifices so that their kids could go to college or could have a better life. And those are such inspiring stories, but where we see that beautiful thing of how parents can turn around and have really highly successful kids in the future.
Yeah. We need to give them more healthy struggles. That's my view. I was on my own,
Well,
fully self-reliant at 17, supporting myself, no financial backstop, nothing.
yeah.
And today, parents would say that's impossible. No, it's totally possible. Human nature hasn't changed. We've just coddled them, too much on
Yeah.
average.
I agree with you, and I started something with our kids when they were young. I asked them if they wanted to go to Sunday school, because personally I had always struggled. I struggled in elementary school. I also struggled in Sunday school, and each of our kids, I said, you can go to Sunday school or you can do an alternative, which is service. We'll go to an old age home and we'll volunteer on Sunday. We'll set up these opportunities to give back. Each kid opted in for service thinking that service would be fun, but it turned out to be so much more challenging in so many different ways than just a traditional Sunday school education. And so I came to start calling these artificial hardships, what you were just saying about struggle. And I told my lovely wife, we need to create these artificial hardships. And we would do it with the kids, whether it was in the summer, finding a program, sort of like an outward bound program where you're going to be in the wilderness, you're going to be out of your comfort zone, you're going to learn new things, changing those experiences that kids are having. Lots of things to be learned through volunteering and service. You can have such amazing learnings in leadership and in entrepreneurship and organization and project management and all kinds of amazing things, how to have a service heart and culture. So we would create these artificial hardships for the kids. And one day Jill comes to me and she says, honey, we can't call it artificial hardships anymore. It just sounds mean. I mean, artificial, that's the word artificial. So I started calling them constructive hardships. We need to have constructive hardships for our kids. And that's how we changed the same system, different brand. But it worked. It worked. So I couldn't agree with you more. That is how you build resiliency. That is how you build character. And that's how you give your child the gift of a toolbox that they can actually really then build the life that they want to lead.
Yeah, wonderful. We're out of time. Any last thoughts for our listeners before we start wrapping up here?
No, I think we've had an amazing chat together. It's super fun to be here. I appreciate what you're doing. I love the framework and the way in which you think about what really matters in the different parts of life. And so I just have nothing but wonderful admiration for what you're doing and appreciation. So thank you for helping others.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, anyone that has sort of curiosity, positive value creation thinking, which you clearly do, it's energizing for me to be around. It's energizing for everybody to be around. I think we can all be that. And so I love your guidance to help us start thinking that way. If our listeners want to learn more about your work and connect with you, how can they do that, Eric?
Sure. You can check out the Cresset website at Cresset Capital. That's Cresset Capital, Capital.com. You can also go to the website on the Long Game book, which is the book that I wrote about 100-year organizations and families and businesses and how they have created the practices and principles and values and processes to be centurions to last for 100 years or more. It's a great way of thinking for families, for CEOs, for leaders of all kinds of organizations. So those are ways in which you can learn a little bit more about what I'm excited about. And I would close with this thought, which is on that question of that idea of asking yourself every day, what am I tolerating but shouldn't be? And then figuring out even just one thing, one step that you could take in order to address whatever that is that you're tolerating and shouldn't be. And I think that could be very life-changing and life-saving under certain circumstances in our lives. So that would be my recommendation.
Super powerful. Eric, thank you again for being my guest today.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee. It was great.
And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, I certainly did. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.